Hello, I'm Cheryl Hicks. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of the Toilet Board Coalition. We're a business-led platform of partners building the sanitation economy. We've started this video series to shed a spotlight on the various business solutions for sanitation and hygiene that we've been working on together with our partners over the past 5 years. And I'm very pleased to have with me today Sue Coates, who is the Executive Director of the Water and Sanitation Collaborative Council, which is a UN organization supporting governments with their water, sanitation, and hygiene strategies. Sue, we've been partners together at the Toilet Board and WSSCC for a number of years now, and you've been at the table in the development of the sanitation economy. Can you share, first of all, who is the WSSCC and a bit about your work and your perspectives on the sanitation economy and the opportunities for governments?
Okay, so thanks, Cheryl, for the opportunity. Yes, WSSCC has been in the sector for around 3 decades now, and we focus on those hardest to reach, most vulnerable populations. And for the last decade, we've been operating the Global Sanitation Fund, which gets grants out to organisations that can work within the context of national plans to promote household sanitation and primarily ending open defecation, so in hard to reach rural communities in the main. We're currently transitioning. We're transitioning to something that will be new from next year called the Sanitation and Hygiene Fund. And that will be a new financing mechanism specifically to look at the international gap in development financing for SDG 6.2, which, as you know, is hygiene, sanitation and menstrual health. So if I think about working with the Toilet Board Coalition and everything that we've been doing to look at partnerships with you and partnerships with the private sector, I think, you know, we're now where we are, particularly in the pandemic, we're understanding more and more that this is an interdependent world and that actually the private-public or public-private partnerships are actually really key to this. And if we want to move forward, if we want companies and service providers really to be able to not only cope with their own disruptions to their own industries, but look for opportunities to as they move forward with new mechanisms, look forward to how they can collaborate differently with different stakeholders. I think there are many, many opportunities in there. And I think we've been tending to think that that's product opportunity, but of course it's so much more than that. So for us, the starting point is that we need highly marginalized and vulnerable householders to be targeted so that they get the support they need now, but also they get the support they need to be more resilient and withstand future shocks beyond the current situation with the pandemic. So I think in many respects, we're at a moment in our collective history where there should be opportunities to do things that hitherto we've only spoken about. You know, so moving from the round tables to actually seeing the action on the ground, I think is critically important.
Thanks, Sue. Yes, the public-private partnerships in this space are really evolving, and as new business solutions really come online and start to scale. So really an important time to also, you know, innovate the public-private partnerships that we've seen in the past for these new systems, the sanitation economy systems that are developing. And can you talk a little bit about the solutions that you've seen, the private sector business solutions that you've seen come online, and you know, as the WSSCC has been you know, such a leader in this space, working with governments, what you see has really changed over the past 5 years with the emergence of these business solutions, and where you see particular opportunities?
Well, I think, first of all, the language of business is now percolating through to government tables, which before there was a void and people didn't seem to understand each other. There was not a common language. And I think that's critical and really pertinent at the moment. So we're seeing more emphasis on mutual accountability. and more space for the private sector to actually come to the table with government and other stakeholders, including those people left behind, to use their different alliances, and here business alliances are really important, I think, to actually embark in more meaningful dialogue with government, and to look not only at multi-sector responses, but also truly multi-stakeholder responses. So as the private sector begins to engage through the development of the sanitation economy, the realization that you're not dealing with one sector, you're dealing with multiple sectors. You're not dealing with vertical silos. Those silos are being broken down in governments, and there are access points that before we didn't see. So I think through mutual accountability, through a dialogue and ensuring that that's not just ticking boxes, we're beginning to see real solutions break through. And this requires a holistic view on households, a holistic view between governments and the private sector and service providers on what is needed in terms of services, and what do marginalised groups need, and what is the role of each of the partners around the table to actually open those markets. And we know that supply chain management, for example, has just been a stumbling block for not only a few years, but for a long, long time.
Thanks, Sue. And just touching on what new solutions are needed. I think in particular in this changing context, rapidly changing context of the global health pandemic, COVID-19. The increased priority on access to hygiene and sanitation as the delivery system of hygiene and health. Can you talk about your perspective on what you're seeing in terms of the new solutions really being that have been emphasized or to really come to the forefront in terms of where business can play a role?
Yeah, I think that's critical, and I'll get to that. But I think first we need to sort of acknowledge that quite often in countries, we're talking about small, micro-size enterprises. And of course, in the current situation, these enterprises not only account for 80% or more of the employment in countries that are hit by the pandemic, but are also where we're seeing a kind of collapse of not just the formal economy, but the informal economy. And so I think we have to acknowledge that to get to the solutions, we need to jointly have advocacy for stimulus packages, to open the dialogue about loans, subsidies, tax incentives, and so on, so that those small and medium operators and private sector, where there is innovation, can really come to the fore. Because there is a great risk, I think, at the moment that if we don't have that joint advocacy, that we won't be able to tackle the more systemic issues. We also know that mass and local behaviour change is key to getting the behaviours in households that we want to see when you talk about hygiene, hand washing, and key practices that need to be inculcated in families. But of course, you can throw as much money as you want at that and get awareness raised. But we know that unless poor households have availability of affordable, attractive, user-friendly household hand washing devices, we're not going to see those behaviours. We also know that if we're on the one hand advocating that households spend more money on soap, they won't spend more money on soap if the unit prices are not addressed along with the supply chains. So we're seeing great innovations coming to the fore, say for example in how to move a tippy tap that used to be made from a plastic bottle into something that might be marketable, that really can go to a rural market or particularly high density markets in the urban space. But this really tells me that many of the innovations are already out there. So how do you now get a match between the investors or the larger companies that can begin to take risks to see these new products really put into the market, or prepared for the market, and then placed into the market. Another interesting area, I think, is the possibility to really kind of think differently about what a partnership could be. I talked about, you know, we're seeing all over the news huge numbers of people in the informal sector losing their jobs. So can we look at job creation through the sanitation market and that economy? And what can the relationships be between those informal sectors, where people now are not only worried about their own families, but they're worried about a collective future? Is there space to actually look at job creation and to use that economy in a different way and bring it more solidly into the sanitation economy? So I think that we're seeing conversations about different things that we've not heard before. We're seeing communities try and do something better. We're seeing smaller scale innovators realize that they've got good ideas, but there still is a gap in how to connect it. And the last bit of that is then, how do we really bring those actors together? And how do you build the conversations quickly enough so that people are prepared to invest and take risks? In Uganda recently, we saw, even with social distancing, an exhibition of products and innovations at a fairly small scale, but are beginning to attract a dialogue where there may be investors who can now come in and support those ideas. The problem is if nobody takes the first jump. And I think
the triangle, right?
Yeah. In India, you're beginning to see through the Toilet Board Coalition those successes now beginning to happen. So, but we need a way to ensure that triangle comes together quicker. Yeah.
Yes. Exactly. And I think also what we're seeing with the crisis is maybe because of the heightened awareness of the needs around access to hygiene and sanitation, a crisper articulation of what those needs are from other stakeholders and businesses then being able to respond. And I think putting together the institutionalizing that more rapid dialogue, as you're saying, that more rapid connection of needs and offers is what's needed now. We're also seeing to address some of those needs. For example, if companies in public hygiene spaces also offering new hygiene solutions, access to hand sanitizer, soap, water, etc., and vice versa. Those that were more focused on the circular sanitation solutions, partnering with those with toilet and hygiene solutions to close that loop, and also an openness of communities in new ways to some of these new solutions that are urgently needed. So I agree. I think the institutionalization of these quicker connections is something that we can work on together.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned that the new Sanitation and Hygiene Fund, the WSSCC, is evolving. Talk about the core priorities of the fund, and really where again business and innovation can play a key role.
So the fund is really looking at the basics that are needed. First of all, it's about a different funding model. It's about always ensuring that government is a central player with this, whether it's receiving the funds or the grants are going through different mechanisms. Whilst that fund will be grant making to begin with, we have a longer view, which is about development financing and looking at the different options around that triangle that we've talked about. The 4 areas are household, sanitation, hygiene, and within that ensuring that there is dignity and provision for the needs of menstruators at a household level. And also looking at household sanitation through the lens of rural, but also unsewered urban settings. Yeah. Then we're looking at schools and health centres, and here we know that there's now a little bit of data, not a great deal, but there is a huge gap, and for decades we've never had the level of investments that are really needed to see systemic changes and the bottlenecks that have persisted really to be removed, and there's a huge area for the private sector, I think, there. And then we're also bringing up the whole area of menstrual health and hygiene. It's talked a lot, but where does it sit? Not only in government, but also in the dialogue with the private sector. Are we just talking about sanitary pads? What are we really looking at collectively? And then the 4th area is around innovation and looking at markets and looking at understanding how you create markets and what money is needed to do that. What does it cost? Who is in the space? How does a government look at this from the perspective of, well, if we can secure catalytic funding, what's the best way to make those dollars work? And to make them work in both a way that considers aspects of climate change, but also, as we've seen, needs to now consider aspects of public health and also the whole area around resilience and sustainability. So plenty of opportunities for partnership with different types of the private sector, whether that be a company that is global or local entrepreneurs, because ultimately this is about countries and country needs and country articulation of that need. And that articulation alone requires the right people to be sitting with the solutions and the ideas, and that can only happen as I said previously, you don't only need the multi-sector, you need the multi-stakeholder dialogue to get that money really working where it's needed.
Thank you, Sue, for sharing with us your perspectives from the leadership of the WSSCC and new opportunities and really the right timing for business and the public sector to work more closely together to speed up that dialogue and actions and really taking a lead also on putting the financing mechanisms in place. For impact, and we're so happy to be working with the WSSCC and the experts you have around the table and stakeholders you have around the table. Thank you, Sue. Namaste.
Thank you too. Bye bye.